Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Dr. Sheila K. Collins, award winning author, grief advocate. She is also an international speaker, grief coach, and consultant. Welcome to the show, Dr. Sheila.
Great to be here, AJ. Thank you for
Welcome,
having me.
welcome to the show. Welcome to India in this online form, Dr. Sheila. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people will benefit from what we are going to learn from you today. We'll talk about how one can transform grief through art. We'll learn all about grief from you. But before that, let's learn a bit more about your journey, your background, so that the audience knows who they are listening to. Yes. If you can tell us a bit about your journey, your background.
Well, let's see. I'm I'm an old person. I mean, I've been around a long time, and I'm not complaining. I'm kind of bragging a little bit because I think a long life is a gift. So, but if you have a life, a long life, you have quite a bit of loss, and so I guess some people would say I've had more than my share, which is what got me into this, I guess. I began my journey with grief when my son was diagnosed with AIDS, and he was a young 25-year-old, and at that time, of course, it was a death sentence. There was no medicine for this, and so it was the experience of living with it and how he did, which was is still an inspiration to me, even all these many years later, to make the best of what we can have, what today we have today. So a lot of that. Then 5 years later, my daughter was diagnosed with breast cancer, and although nowadays most people, it's inconvenient and difficult, but you don't die from it. But in her case, she did eventually. And so I was her caregiver while she had a bone marrow transplant. And of course, the hard part there was that she left 3 children for her husband to raise. So we don't get to pick sometimes what happens to us, and a lot of things that happen we would not choose. So that's what got me into this whole idea of grief. And I think that I know you're in India, and your country many of your people may have a different view of grief, but the Western view was just get over it. It's kind of like, okay, it's climb the stairs and dust your hands off and it's done. And of course, that's not the way it is. And the ancients knew that, and indigenous peoples of all countries know that. So I feel like it's been a journey back to understand what is grief really, and how do we process it. So for me, I started out life as a dancer, so I had a little bit of a different view than some of my colleagues at the university. I was also a professor of social work, and I discovered that some of what we knew about grief was not true. So people need to look at it differently or learn about it differently. And it turns out that many cultures use the arts to process. The arts can help us. At a time when we've experienced loss, there's something very invigorating about creating something new. And so anyway, my journey as an author was, first of all, people were kind of not wanting to even look at it. Maybe they'd be too upset. I don't know. Very protective of ourselves, And I began to see that coming at it a little differently, with a little different attitude, to see grief as something that is how we become who we are. How we become who we are. Going through the struggle, going through the tough stuff, and helping other people. So one of my most significant journeys was being with my best friend, as she was her job was to die. She couldn't stay, and she said, "You come and help me do this." And so I she said, "You come and help me do this, and then I'll be there for you when it happens to you." And I thought, how's that going to work? But I didn't say. I just was there with her. 14 days I was with her, and that experience of being what people would call in between the worlds. You're not in this world, but you're not in the next one either. And so it's that journey of going from one to the other, and it was one of the richest experiences of my life. Uh, Something I call on a lot now. So yeah, so I think part of it is, instead of seeing it as stair steps, we see it as a spiral. We see it as a spiral, which means, um, okay, the holiday that you have in your country every year where the family gathers, that comes around every year. I mean, every year. So you will get the opportunity to miss that person, but also to celebrate that person and to tell the stories of that person, which is, for me, it's the storytelling is an art, and that's how the wisdom comes from the elders to the young people and to the next generation.
Absolutely, absolutely, Sheila. Thank you for that. And I want to understand from you, what do you want others to understand about grief? You talked about, in some parts of the Western world, it's like just get over it. But
Yes.
is it this easy? Because the same word is also talking of trauma. It talks about childhood trauma. It talks about trauma, and it talks about generational trauma.
Right.
But why does it want to talk about grief? Get over it. Isn't it a bit of an irony?
You have put your finger on something very important here. So let me just say this. So one of the experiences that we've had across the globe is COVID, right? And it impacted some people more than others, but everybody had at one point an incredible amount of loss, right? And so during that time, my dance studio, which is where I am now, is now a media studio, and I'm online with people, right? And so initially, it's like terrible, I mean, but then the gift of it was I could be with people that don't live in my town, that don't live in my country. So there's never a losses without gains. And maybe it's not what we prefer, but so okay, so we all go through this. Now during that time, I'm writing my book, so I am trying to think this through about this loss and what is important about loss, and how does it make us uh, different, more, perhaps more mature, and so then I get my proposal for the book, and the woman says to me, the expert on publish, well, you got to take out all this COVID stuff, because by the time your book comes out, people are going to be sick of it and they don't want to hear about it. So I was like, well, actually, that's kind of the reason I'm writing this, because we don't discover the messages, the wisdom, the truth in something without some perspective on it. And if we just get rid of it, we don't get the lessons from it. We don't get that. And that's part of what I see as, I call myself a grief advocate, which is, I'm advocating for it because it's a part of life, and it's a very important part of life. And there's a lot of beautiful gifts in it. And I know that's hard to convince people of if they're thinking, oh, come on, I've got a busy schedule here, so
Absolutely. How did you process your grief when something happens? You talk about anticipatory grief. We'll come to that later on. But I want to understand many a times things just happen. Even if we know that there can be something like not so good, but we are not prepared for it. And whenever it happens, it puts us in grief. The world may want us to get over it, but how do we, deal with that thing? Should we just pass over that particular thing? Do we drown into that thing and then come out of it? What is the best way to look at grief when it happens? And should we look at also the future or just be in that moment of grief for that point in time, Sheila?
Well, well, it depends on what else is going on in your life, you know. So one of the things that often when something very strong, a strong loss happens, you may have responsibilities. You may have children that you're raising. You may have so I like there's different theories about grief, but I like the one that's called the dual process. So so I'm taking some time. I'm slowing down a bit. I'm meditating. I'm going for a walk in the woods. Uh, but that's not my whole life, because in the meantime, I got to make the dinner, or do the laundry, or so there's that. But I think if we look at it in relation to you asked me how what I recognize is that I was using the arts without even consciously realizing that. So one of the things that you might do, my friend Rose would say, I don't know what I really think until I hear myself say it. Some people are like that, right? So if I'm telling it to you and it comes out of I think, oh yeah, that is right. So in a way, you are my witness. You are holding the space for me in terms of my being able to explore what I do think about that. This is a wonderful service you provide for your podcaster guests, to be a good listener to us. So, but there's an art to that, really, and so that would be one. In my book, The Art of Grieving: How Art and Artmaking Help Us Live Our Best Lives, I have a chapter on storytelling, and sometimes it is just a phone call with a friend. Sometimes it is writing it down, and then reading it, or having it come back to you, because grieving is processing. It's processing. It's discovering. It's discovering ourselves and our life, and I know that eventually it gets to a place of gratitude for the person's life, that you had that person or that thing. I mean, gratitude for COVID. I know it's like, oh, there was a time when we didn't feel very grateful for it. But I'm sure that people that are listening to this, having gone through that, they could look back and see there is some things that were, perhaps it was slowing their life down, or perhaps they had time to do some things. In fact, people did art during that time. I mentioned I started working on my book because I was pulled away from the busyness of my usual, life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Talking of grief, you talk about, let's make art out of what happens to us. Can you help us understand this better?
Right. Well, I practice, excuse me, I practice a system that is called Interplay. And so an interplay is an improvisational art-based system where we tell our stories, but we tell them differently. Maybe we tell them in a made-up language. Partly we have some forms that are side by side, where I tell something and then you tell something. Anyway, it's based in the body, it's based in movement, because it was created by two dancing ministers. So and so this I went into Interplay at the time that my son was diagnosed. And so immediately I began using this storytelling, this moving, this dancing, this singing. If you sing it, it's different. If I tell you, if I make a song, it's different. So the other thing that is so exciting to me right now is that what we're discovering, what science is discovering, is that all these things change our brains. That if I'm drawing, if I'm doodling, there's something happening in my brain. If I'm talking, something different is happening. If I'm singing, something different. So in a way, we're processing all the time. And that's what I think the role of the arts is. Sometimes it's done on our behalf, where you go to a film and you see a story and it's all being played out for you. One of the first things that happened to me when I was when my son had been diagnosed with AIDS is I went to a conference, and there were people there who were working with AIDS patients and people who had ideas about, because like I said, there was no medicine. So, maybe how does meditation help? How does, my family, we went and to this meeting, and so at lunch they gave us, they had a presentation, and it was a performance. It was an interplay performance, and so we gave them words about AIDS. Fear. That was one, I think. Fear. Whatever it was, we gave them words, and then they played with those things using the interplay forms. So here I am eating my sandwich, right? And here is my life and my concerns being played out for me and all of us in the room by these players. So this is the dance on behalf, we call it. On behalf, we can see, we can learn from, and we can feel held.
Right, right. What happens if someone doesn't grieve well, whatever happens?
Oh,
And what is this grieving well about? How do we understand grieving well?
oh, AJ, you're putting your finger right on it. This is what is dedicated, has given me the dedication I have to get the word out about this. Because when people don't, you see, we have pain, of course. I mean, sometimes it's excruciating. If we don't process that and have people holding us, companioning us, it goes from what you would call the good pain of eventually, getting us to a new place. It goes to bad pain or dirty pain. That's what it's called, dirty. It comes out on other people. It comes out, and we all have this. I mean, somebody was really mean to me one day, not too long ago, and I was pretty good about the whole thing. I was really pretty mature, But then I was on the phone with some tech person, and then I was not nice to that person. I mean, and I thought I didn't process that other thing very well because that it came out here. It squirts out, so you might say, when we don't handle our own, if we don't process our own life, and actually, I began. One of the things I did, I started writing a blog once a week about grief, and I thought, what if we looked at a lot of things that are problems in our cultures, the big things that are happening, if we started looking at that as grief, and maybe grief that's not processed yet. And I just began to see a lot. And I really have the belief that if we would learn to grieve well, where we're processing it, where it's not squirting out at each other, where we're not doing crazy stuff, we would really, a lot of our problems would go away. I mean, people shooting people. I mean, this, I'm sure I don't know if you have as much as we do, but I mean, we have gun violence incredible schools where people can't even, go to school without worrying about this. So this is, for me, this is a lot of this is unprocessed grief and loss.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, what is the best way to grieve? Is there a particular period? You talk about rituals. And if you tell that to an Indian person, grief as well as rituals, our life is full of rituals, especially around grief. And most of the grief, if you understand, it's about the loss of life within the family, even if it is age related, or even it is there is a certain. I still remember, and especially in smaller places, maybe in the cities, things are a bit changing. We have so many roles to fulfill, but we do have many rituals around so that you can remember the lost one very fondly, the way you want to. You have enough time in hand. Your society knows about it. Everyone knows about it. And when they come to meet you, they are coming to you only for that, to be a part of you, to be around you. And when you talked about the yearly ritual, also we have this whole several days in continuous when we remember our ancestors and all those people who have lost. That's known as a very special sacred month. So I
Oh,
just want to
yes.
understand
Yes.
from your perspective in terms of rituals that you want to understand. I just thought I'll share the Indian way we look at grief.
Oh, yes. And you are way ahead of us. I can tell you. We have an interplay community in India, and some of my colleagues have been to India, and so one of the things they note, like you use the arts in a way, so you may have a business meeting or some kind of a, and then some people dance and sing, and we're very envious of that because we're so serious here. I mean, just so serious. And so you're describing what that was the way, the ancient way in all cultures was the community and holding the person and chanting and the singing, the lament, where that was done on behalf of the people who were grieving. And so, in some ways, the reason for me to even, think of writing a book about this is that has been lost. So even in our country, of course, we have people from many countries, and the rituals may be different, but they have similarities. And one of the similarities is using the arts. So you come to the service, and there's beautiful music. There's flowers. There's beauty in to be grateful for what we have, to recognize the preciousness of life. So that carried forward means I'm greeting the next day as a gift.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's come to your book, The Art of Grieving: How Art and Art Making Help Us Grieve and Live Our Best Lives. Sheila, tell us a bit about your book. What is this book about? We know this book is about grieving, but who is this book for? Because the person is gone, the living are living, but they don't know that they are grieving or they have grieved enough. Help us understand then, who is this book for? What can people learn
Well,
from this?
yes, and what you just said, I think, is very important to note. So we may be familiar, or we may realize we're grieving if someone dies. But what I began to see is we may be grieving not about a death, but it could be something that is like a death in the sense of how it impacts us.
Right.
So, you're fired from your job, so there's a kind of humiliation there added to this loss. There's a fear of how am I going to support my family? I mean, so there's many losses, and maybe my thought was if we could get better at grieving the smaller ones, or that might help us to recognize that everything that we love we will lose. guaranteed. So that doesn't sound like a happy thought, but it does help us recognize that when we're recognizing grief. And by the way, one of the things in the first chapter, I talk about loss in terms of even just naming it. While during COVID, I did some online programs with people, and of course at that point, well, I've lost my ability to go to my coffee shop. All of the tsunami of losses. And that's the other thing. Loss doesn't happen. Oh, well, here's a loss, and now that you process that, and now then you can do the next one. It's just like, no. Sometimes people say, I'm overdone with the number of them. And that was certainly a good example, but that can even happen now, where you have this is going on, and then by the way, this, and it's in our country right now, we're just in the middle of so many losses. We can't take a breath, So it's which is, I think, by the way, why we need each other, why we need the community. That is so. I think getting back to how I was looking at it and helping people to look at it differently, so that rather to use the art image of a spiral rather than the stair steps, And so the artist that did my cover, to realize that this is the spiral is the path of energy in the universe. So why would it not be the path of our energy, of our thoughts, of our, that things that remind us of something, and then we think we're crazy. One of the stories in the book is a sister, a nun, who told me that she went into the grocery store one day. It was a sunny day. She was feeling fine, and then all of a sudden she just tears up in the middle of the aisle, and she's looking around for what is the matter with her, and what's happened. And she was reminded of a dear friend of hers who had crossed a few months before, and she'd had all the rituals, and friends, the community celebrated this person and all of that, but this came to her. Well, then she looks around and she sees that there's pies on the shelf there, and the pies are mincemeat pies, and that was her friend's specialty. So the reminder came to her through through her senses, took her right to the connection with her friend. So when you see that, you see what this is, how our brain is. We're affected by something through our senses. And that's also, of course, why the arts are so powerful, because that's what they do. They take us through our senses, through our sense of hearing, through our sense of seeing, through our sense of being.
Right. So one final question I want to understand from you, Sheila, is that how does one know that the grieving is over and it's time for memories to come in?
And it's time for memories?
Yes.
Well, I think that the memories are going to be there if you allow them. And they are messages. They are messages. So people will say to me sometimes, I feel like I'm closer to my father now that he's not here than I was when he was. I mean, because he's become a part of me. And so I used to say about my friend Rose, we were so close, and we had so much time together that and it's true now, 20 some years later, there is nothing that's happened in my life that I did not know immediately what Rose would say about it, and so in some ways I was using her wisdom sometimes when things were happening, particularly in the political arena, because she was really good about that. Some political crazy thing would happen, and she was really good. And so when that happens in my life, I think about what would Rose say about this. So memories are the gifts, and also that, like, consultation with the people that are wiser than you are.
Absolutely. There is much to learn about these things from you, Sheila, and I'm sure a lot of people would want to learn more about your story, about your life, about you, about your book, and also about you being an advocate as well as a coach. So maybe become your client also and take your help in that. What is the best way for them to do so?
Well, there's a couple things. I have a website, and it's my name. It's SheilaKCollins.com. And then the other thing, I've just got on something called Substack, which is a platform for writers, and I'm very excited about that. I'm meeting people and trading ideas with other writers who are interested in this topic. So that would be another place that we could meet.
Wonderful, wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for
Oh,
joining
thank you,
us.
AJ. It's been very pleasant. Thank you. Thank you.